Hello, welcome to another Burgundy with Tweedy video. Spring is definitely on its way. Well, it's started in full force, hasn't it? I can see some bluebells just beyond where I'm sitting here, just about starting to flower. You get those sort of asparagus head type things that pop up from amidst all the leaves, and they're just starting to turn colour. A week from now, we'll all be bored of them. I've just today taken another delivery from, yet again, Lay and Wheeler. I'm still finding interesting stuff in their catalogue and pretty reasonable prices comparatively. This is a wine I think I have tried and failed to buy before. This is Joseph Roty's Bourgogne Rouge Pressonnier. Now then, those of you familiar with Gevrey Chambertin will know that there is a vineyard in Gevrey Chambertin by that name, Pressonnier. Interestingly, it straddles the boundary of what can be called Gevrey Chambertin. Some of it is coloured to indicate that those parts of this vineyard are able to be sold as Gevrey Chambertin, and the rest of it is coloured such that if you happen to have your vines there rather than a few metres over, even though it's the same vineyard, those bits will have to be sold as just the lowest of the low, Bourgogne Rouge. I think I even read somewhere that, was it up until the 1960s, possibly, the whole lot was considered Gevrey Chambertin, and then for some arbitrary reason it was cut in half. Sadly for Joseph Roty, that's where they happen to own some vines. So they lost out, but on the plus side, there is something that, you know, anyone who isn't a huge pedant might just about consider to be some form of Gevrey Chambertin. It is right on the edge of that lump that is described as Gevrey Chambertin, and it was historically considered Gevrey Chambertin, but it's about half the price. I'll put the exact price on the screen, but I think it was in the region of 30 quid, and if this were Joseph Roty's village level Gevrey Chambertin, it would be closer to 60. So we get a 50% discount. Maybe that's just the Lay and Wheeler prices. They're sometimes a bit of a bargain, but you know, a 50% discount for a technicality that it can't quite be called Gevrey Chambertin, but I'm hoping this will have many of the same traits. It is a 2018 vintage, which is not always my favourite, if I'm honest, but that was just what was available. Perhaps other vintages go for higher prices, I don't know. Talk amongst yourselves while I faff around with foil. Another sign that spring is fully underway is that there are biting insects out now. We really don't get much of a window of pleasant weather starting before all of the downsides of pleasant weather follow through. I was going to say it says Gevrey Chambertin on the cork, but that's just saying that that's where the domain is based, and that's where it was bottled, presumably. Quite a dark colour there, isn't it? Somebody recently commented on one of my other videos that that is a bit of a trait of these hot years like 2018, that they tend to produce more or darker. I think the description there was black cherry, but that does seem to be a bit of a running theme now I think about it. So first whiff, I would say, yep, black cherry. But that's still within the realms of cherry, and I don't mind black cherry as long as it's not black cherry jam. I wouldn't say at that first nose this is giving a sense of something really confected, jammy, overly sweet. Of course, you know, sweetness is a taste, not an aroma, but you can often tell from the smell of things what the level of sweetness is going to be like. And that is, I think, quite a pleasant dark cherry and possibly dark berry fruit sort of aroma there. And so far, it's quite convincingly Gevrey Chambertin-esque. Haven't even given that much of a swirl yet, but let's swirl that around, see what changes. The fruit is fresher and livelier now. Yes, definitely black cherry, but I think we're also veering a little bit blackberry. Not really black currant, I think blackberry. Mûr, what a lovely word that is. French word for blackberries, but not in a very rustic, hedgerowy sort of way. There is a bit of refinement to that, I would say. Fruity, dark, but there is a sort of an elegance to that which I quite like. I'm noticing some of that Joseph Roty house style there. It is quite rich, it's quite intense. It is pretty Gevrey Chambertin-esque, actually, quite concentrated. As part of that richness, there is a little bit of sweetness. It certainly isn't overwhelmingly jammy, but people who are very, very jam averse might find the sugar levels here possibly a tiny bit on the high side. Let me give it another sip and see if I stand by that comment. I don't know. Perhaps that was unfair, I don't know. There is quite a tannic backdrop to that, a sort of papery, mouthfeel, in the aftertaste there. So there is definitely some wood influence here somehow or other, or some stem influence, whether the tannins come from, or just skins, I suppose. It's not quite as silky smooth as some of the Joseph Roty Gevrey Chambertins are. There's definitely a little bit more tannic influence there, and that does give it a kind of dryness, which in a way slightly offsets the big fruit and gives it a sort of a kind of balance. That's sometimes described as structure. Tannins giving the wine structure. There are definitely some hints of 2018, I think. The black cherry notes, and I want to say it's a tiny bit jammy. I don't know. I'm going back and forth whether or not I think this is a little bit veering that way. But there is also a savouriness there, and that again offsets that big fruit, that big bold fruit. I think the fruit's nice. I like that fruit character. It is, like I say, black cherry, blackberry, and there is a sort of scratchiness from those tannins, so it does give a slight sense of brambles in a little bit of an elevated, more refined way, but there's a little bit of sense of the bramble bushes, and it's not exactly as I'm being scraped with thorns on the inside of my mouth, but there is a certain kind of abrasion there from those tannins. I think that aside, I actually quite like this. If the tannins would just soften, which they may well do with just a bit more airing, a bit more time in the glass. It does feel to me quite Gevrey Chambertin-esque. You could slap a different label on that, and I would be convinced that is at least an expression of Gevrey Chambertin. It has that kind of richness and that intensity. The tannins can come and go with Gevrey. Some are, some aren't. Depends on the producer and how the wine is made exactly. I quite like that, and particularly at that price. I'll perhaps come back to you later if I have any further thoughts, if I have an update on the tannin situation, but if not, I think for the money that's decent. I think I will deliver an addendum to this. It has softened a little bit. I'm never sure. I feel like I say the same thing every time, but it may just be that I've acclimatized to the tannins, got used to it. They're definitely still there. I'm definitely still noticing that kind of papery finish to the mouthfeel, but it's definitely more drinkable now. And I would say that the black cherry is ebbing a little bit. I'm getting much more of that blackberry, and again, I know I overuse this reference, but I'm thinking sort of black raspberry, that Chambord liqueur style thing, possibly relevant to that comment, which I think was quite insightful. This may be, some of these things may be characteristics of a hot year, the 2018 effect, but I am still managing to enjoy this. I think partly just I really like Joseph Roty as a producer. I really like those rich but condensed and acidic styles of wines that they make, and there is a decent amount of acidity in here. It is big bold fruit, as you might expect from that vintage 2018, but I think it is carried along by this condensed acidity. Does that make sense as a string of words? Concentrated, but quite acidic. Definitely not quite at the finesse of, for example, Joseph Roty's 2019 Gevrey Chambertin, which I recently sent a friend as a present. I liked it so much, a birthday present for a friend. I thought that's really spectacular, and that's doing everything I want. It's a great year, 2019. I think everyone agrees with that. This is clearly a step down from there, but it's also half the price. And if you want something that has a bit of a hint of Gevrey Chambertin, but you're noticing the current decline of the stock market, as I am, if you're keeping an eye on your pension or other investments. I love finding these things around the edges. I've done this series for a while. I have a playlist of, what do I call it, below the radar Burgundies or under the radar Burgundies. These things that are sold as a very humble, very low level appellation, like Bourgogne Rouge, the absolute lowest of the low, but actually do come from a specific plot which is right on the edge of, or for some reason doesn't get categorized, labeled as one of the more prestigious appellations like Gevrey Chambertin. So I really feel like this does give you a hint of that style. I think it's doing that kind of concentration, that richness, that sort of slight power of Gevrey Chambertin. Does have one or two things I would like to improve about it, but then, it is a step down in price and a step down in appellation, and that's probably all to be expected, I think. Overall, I'm actually quite happy with that. Cheers.